Namaste, and welcome and good evening to this evening's Bhagavad Gita commentary. Before I begin, I'd like to mention that last week we were not able to broadcast, and I apologize for that. I and the team that sometimes substitutes for me, and even the technical assistants, the technicians and camera people, we were all called away to a special event in Pune. So now I think everything's back online, and we're very happy to be with you this evening. We're going to, this evening, continue our discussion that was begun 2 weeks ago on chapter 12 in Swami Kriyananda's commentaries, Essence of Bhagavad Gita. He titles it The Path of Bhakti Yoga. And many people who have commented on the Gita over the centuries, if you read them, tend to divide the Gita into certain segments. In the beginning of the Gita, Krishna is explaining the path, you might say, of karma yoga, of right action, how we should act in this world, nishkam karma. We cannot avoid action, we must fight this battle. He goes on then also to discuss Raja Yoga, or the inner path, the path of withdrawing one's energy. He talks about Jnana Yoga, the path of discrimination, the path of wisdom, and then he reveals himself to Arjuna in chapters 11. And after that, we come to chapter 12, and you might say that that from chapter 12 through toward the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is going to focus more on the heart, on the Bhakti Yoga, and that he might, in essence, he's saying, we have laid out this highest wisdom to you, O Arjuna. Absorb that, immerse yourself in me through these various practices, Jnana Yoga, the meditation, the practice of right action. But even as we'll see in tonight's reading, he says, immerse yourself in me. But if you cannot do these things, then do lower service, concentration, offer all action to me. Think of me in whatever you're doing. And as he concludes, he said, and in the translation of Sir Edwin Arnold, he says, and if in all of this thy faint heart fails, offer me your failure. And in whatever way you can, make me the central point of your life, not just your devotion, your spiritual life, but of your entire life. Immerse yourself in me. And he's going to then, now in these chapters that proceed, he's going to elaborate on that, of how to live the life from the heart and express that in everything that we do. This is I think we, all of us, as we'll see in tonight's reading, find ourselves at some point on the spectrum. Yes, the goal is to 100% immerse oneself in God, in the Lord. But we look at our life, that we cannot always do that. So we have to find that point in the spectrum of our spiritual life that we can offer some sort of higher service that is in the direction that we're trying to move ourselves in. You could say that the important thing is not so much where we are on that spectrum, because that is a fact. We're at a certain point. The important point is in what direction are we moving, even in failure. We often think of failure as a negative thing, or as Swami would like to say, don't ever say you've failed, say you just have not yet succeeded. Success is the goal toward which you're moving. But even in failure, you should offer that too to God, because the goal of all of yoga practice, and whatever point we find ourselves on that spectrum, is to be moving in that positive direction of understanding that I am not the doer. Who is it that failed anyway? Did I fail? And of course we think that when we feel a sense of failure, of non-succeeding, we feel that was I that failed. Isn't it an interesting thing between failure and success? We speak about learning to do all things with the sense of I'm not the doer, that God is the doer, to be non-attached. We've learned this and we've spoken of it many times. But isn't it interesting that it's much easier, at least I find this to be so, to be non-attached to things at which we can succeed. We say, oh yeah, God was the doer. I didn't really succeed at that. God, we can feel God's energy perhaps more closely when we succeed at something, but yet it's harder to be non-attached when we fail, when we make a fool of ourselves, when we fall down and we stumble. Who fell down? I fell down, and we feel that sense of attachment to that. But what's the difference really between success and failure? It's all God's play. We happen to be the instrument that is acting in this play. But the playwright who wrote the scenario, sometimes it means that we succeed, sometimes it means we fail. Sometimes perhaps we're the hero of the piece, at other times we're the villain of the piece. But yet to neither should be attached. I've noticed this, that people tend to, when they come, sometimes people ask me for advice. I notice that people tend to hold on to those things that they're not good at. And you could say this is one reason why it's a positive thing for us to be able to be successful in life, to succeed at something. I have used this as illustration before, but sometimes I like to play little puzzles to pass the time in between things, quick little puzzles. And if I can succeed at that puzzle, let's say it's a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku puzzle or something like that, if I could see it, I put it aside. I'm done with it. I forget it. But if I fail at it, it sticks with me. I want to come back to it. And I keep coming back to it, you could say, until I succeed with it. And then once I succeed with it, I let it go. Well, it's often like that in life as well. We go through life, we have the lessons to learn in life, we don't succeed at those lessons, but they stick with us. And until you might say, our goal, our soul wants perfection, our soul wants to overcome the challenges of life. And of course, this life is just a series of challenges, one problem after another, until we find solutions. And we want to be able to overcome them. Now, you could say the philosophical person says, oh, you shouldn't be attached to that. And that's true. You shouldn't be attached. But the fact is we are. And so consequently, as long as we're in this realm, let's be successful. Let's perfect ourselves. Let's do the best job we can possibly do. Not to reap the rewards of it, but you do the best you can so you can forget it. And you can let it go. And in time, you begin to see that you're the actor in the play, and this is God's play. And our job is simply to do our best. And if sometimes it's not meant to be, not all of us can be Einstein or Leonardo or a great artist. But yet, if we do our best, then in a sense, you can let it go. I look back on my life, and I look back, and sometimes I think about when I was in school. And I got generally good grades, but there were sometimes I didn't get the best grades, and it wasn't because I wasn't smart enough to get the best grades, because I look back and say, I really didn't try very hard. I really could have done better. And at the time, I just said, I'm not interested in this, and it didn't bother me. Now I look back and I say, in some ways, I wish I would have given it my best. And to those classes that I gave my best, and I got the lower mark, I feel okay about it. I let it go. I did my best. But those that I got the lower mark, when I knew I could have done better, those I still remember. And life is like that. The challenges come to us, and it's almost as if the challenges are asking us to exert whatever it is that's being asked of us. So if we fail at that and we did our best, give it to God. It's easier to give those things to God. Now, to read today's reading. For today, we're at chapter 12, stanza 6 through 11. And Krishna is saying, for those who venerate only me, offering to me all their actions, with their minds concentrated on me by yoga practice, and their hearts' feelings uplifted to me in devotion. Such devotees I rescued from the ocean of mortality. Immerse your consciousness in me alone. Direct all your discrimination toward finding me. Then, beyond any doubt, you shall come to me. Now, before I go on, I should mention that when Krishna is speaking of me here, he's speaking this in the cosmic sense, the cosmic universal sense. Unfortunately, sometimes people read this and think of it in a very sectarian sense of Krishna, a Yadava king of a few thousand years ago, in the sense of, is that who, offer your worship to me? And so consequently, oh no, not to Christ, not to Allah, or not to this form or that, but to this particular form. And that's not how this is meant. He's speaking Krishna is speaking here from the universal sense, that offer ourselves to that universal consciousness of Satchitananda, if you want to use another word for it. To that, we should immerse ourselves in that, lose ourselves in that divine consciousness, that infinity beyond all outward form. But that said, it's not bad to personalize that as well. And this is the you might say the path of bhakti yoga is to take that universal and to put it in personal form, but to remember it's the personal form is but an expression of something beyond that personal form, beyond the personal. It's the universal. The mind can't hold an infinity. Who can conceptualize it? We can't. So we have to take that and be able to personalize it in order for our own benefit. But remember, it's just a holding container. The question of what is God is in sense of trying to come to a description, an outward objective description of what God is. And it's impossible because words cannot hold that. But yet we have this concept of it. We have this feeling for it. Intuitively, perhaps we can understand what that means. So the question of what is God is not the right question. The better one would be, how do I know God? How can I experience God? How can I perceive God? Because that perception takes the superconscious awareness. The mind must be in that superconscious state, where the objective reality, when we try to make a description, is merely the conscious mind, the rational mind, which is incapable of holding that concept. Krishna goes on then, O Dhananjaya, Arjuna, if you cannot absorb your thoughts in the contemplation of me, then practice the technique of yoga, which is intended to help develop concentration. If, however, you find yoga practice too difficult, then perform all actions in the thought of me. By this means, too, you shall achieve final success. But even if during activity you cannot think of me, then give me your intentions. Ever striving to discipline your mind, offer to me the fruit of your labor, of your every labor. Now I'd like to read just a short section of Swamiji's commentary here. He says, Sir Edwin Arnold put it beautifully in his much loved and deservedly so paraphrase, the Song Celestial. His translation of this passage is, but if in this thy faint heart fails, bring me thy failure. That's so beautiful. This, what Krishna is saying here, is immerse yourself in me. This is a concept that we need to go into more deeply. I take it as something very similar to what the great Saint Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutra, where he says, when at the beginning of this is part of the Yoga Sutras, his exposition of the Eightfold Path of Ashtanga Yoga, he talks about the yamas and he talks about the 5 niyamas. And one of traditionally, the fifth niyama is Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara Pranidhana. And what is that? Ishvara is God. You could say the divine presence, the divine reality. Pranidhana is paying attention to. Now, it's often translated as worship. Swamiji, in his Art and Science of Raja Yoga, he defines this niyama as worship of the Supreme Lord. Some people say surrender to the Supreme Lord. Or Swamiji also, in his commentaries on the Yoga Sutra, says opening oneself to higher truth, because it's putting our attention on something that is beyond our ego awareness. And this is a very, very important niyama that is often overlooked a little bit. I notice when people give commentary on the yamas and niyamas, typically this last one, this fifth one, tends to be the shortest of the commentaries, because it seems, well, worship of the Supreme Lord, that seems obvious. But what does that mean, and why is that important? And we must realize it's a niyama, which the niyamas are prescriptions, things we must do. So it's not passive, it's an act, something active. We must actively have paying this attention to this higher reality. Because if we don't, what we have is we do not aspire to something that transcends who and what we feel we are right now. The sense that I am the doer. The devotee must always have an attitude of aspiration toward some higher reality, a recognition that the world in which we live, this reality of the conscious world of matter, this is not the ultimate reality. The heart itself must always be upwardly aspiring to something larger, something greater. And this, of course, is the essence of what it means to be devotional. The devotion, the aspiration of the heart to something more. There is, in the yoga tradition, you find that there's a little bit of diverse view of the science of yoga. And one reason, as I mentioned, that this fifth niyama sometimes is not expanded upon is because people feel uncomfortable to the definition, perhaps, of devotion to the Supreme Lord, because people like to think of yoga as perhaps non-sectarian, non-religious overtones. And this seems to give it that sense of a religious overtone, whereas yoga is not involved, it's not a religious practice. Well, we don't have to accept this niyama of Ishvara Pranidhana as a religious injunction. What it's saying is we have to aspire to that higher reality. We must recognize that there is something beyond the here and now of what we experience, and that you could say this is a divine reality of which we are a part. And unless we, through the practice of our yoga, open ourselves to that, we tend to bind ourselves and lock ourselves into ego. All of the yamas and niyamas, on a very deeper level of understanding, they are intended to take us toward ego transcendence. If you look, we don't have time right now to do this, but if you look at each one, the perfection of each of the yamas and the perfection of each of the practice of niyamas has the quality of ego transcendence. And so we must embody that ego transcendence in our daily practice of whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's karma yoga, jnana yoga, Raja yoga, meditation, bhakti yoga. It's about learning to go beyond the ego, to be able to open up the heart to something larger, to be able to receive that. And if you do not have this quality of, as Krishna says in the Gita, of wanting, aspiring to immerse the little self in me, immerse yourself in me, he's saying, immerse the little ego into the cosmic sea of infinity. And unless we have that, we find ourselves limited. We'll never be able to go beyond the attitude or the consciousness of I, this little self, am the doer. And so you find that people who, perhaps you see this often, you see this in those people who simply practice yoga on a physical level. They tend to limit themselves simply to that, and they don't feel comfortable, perhaps, going beyond the body, beyond this sense of the physical presence. Now, this is missing the point of what yoga is all about, and this is something Sri Yukteswar mentioned as one of the obstacles in the spiritual path, missing the point, not seeing the goal toward which all of these practices of meditation, all of these practices of yoga, pranayama, kriya yoga, all of these are designed to take us to the point of transcending the yoga, transcending this identity, little identity of self. And if you don't have this sense of immersing yourself in something larger, you tend to see people get the wrong attitudes. Those attitudes that are attendant to thinking that I am the doer will naturally begin to block you. And the same thing is you begin to miss the point, which is expressed in the Bible of to all those who received him, gave he the power to become the sons of God. That sense of attunement. This is why Swami Kriyananda, in his commentaries on the Yoga Sutras, define this as openness to higher truth. We have to approach life with this attitude of being open to life. And as we're open to something larger than ourselves, a recognition that I do not know everything. I do not, and that essence of I don't know, I want to know, you could say is the prerequisite of what it means to be a disciple. It's that disciple-guru relationship that is the bulwark of the spiritual path. The essence of that is having that openness and ability to receive. And it's that desire to immerse oneself into something larger. Then you could say, if we do not recognize that, our spiritual path eventually becomes dry. We don't open up those and develop those tools that are essential for us to be able to succeed, to try to immerse oneself to the degree that one can. And so consequently, here in this reading, Krishna says, well, if you can't do that, do yoga. If you can't immerse yourself perfectly, do yoga practice. If you can't do that, learn to concentrate. If you can't do that, give all service to me. If you can't do that, just love, as the best to your ability. Give me your failure. And so what Krishna is saying here, underneath it all, is the essence of the spiritual path. Try your best, but at the very basis of everything you're doing, give your love to me. And this he's here introducing and emphasizing the importance of opening up and developing the qualities of the heart. This is the foundation of the spiritual path. Swami Sri Yukteswar would say that without developing first the natural love of the heart, we can't take one step on the spiritual path, because it's only by developing that heart quality that we develop the magnetism. And the magnetism starts here. It's not mental magnetism, it's magnetism of the heart. We can only develop by developing the magnetism of the heart. It's only through that we can attract to ourselves the teachings, and ultimately a teacher who can help us uplift ourselves from the station that we are now to something higher. So that magnetism is the prerequisite of the spiritual path. Now it's interesting that Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita doesn't start with this when Arjuna poses the question on the battlefield between the two armies and asks for guidance, he begins very logically with action, right action, duty, so on and so on, and goes on to withdrawing the senses, ultimately the discrimination. And then he reveals himself. And then in that revelation, Arjuna experiences, he perceives, and he feels, and he knows from the heart the reality, because he has that perception, and then he understands. Now, it's a little bit in reverse order of what Sri Yukteswar was advising. We have to develop the heart. But yet, I think it's in a sense, would Arjuna have understood if he didn't first respond to Krishna from the side of the Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga instruction? He had to first be reached. And so oftentimes you find people come, if they're not devotees already, they're not perhaps devotionally inclined, they first come to the spiritual teachings through the mind because that's what they're used to. But as we engage in spiritual practice, we then come to understand that there's limitations to it. And we ask, what do we really need? And then the heart by that time, at least, or the mind by that time, is open to something larger. But if, I know for myself, if I would have been appealed to strictly from the heart at the very beginning, my heart was closed to it and I would have rejected it. But I could respond through the mind, through my action. And then I accepted that as a possibility. Then I asked, what more is there that I need to do? And then I came to understand I must open the heart. I must develop love. And so Sri Yukteswar is saying this is where we must begin on the spiritual path. Now, interestingly, too, in a deeper level, you can look at this, the necessity for devotion and opening up the heart from the yogic perspective. The heart is here at the, you could say, at the lower end of the the top three of the upper half of the chakras, the 6 chakras. These bottom 3 are associated with outward consciousness, this outward reality, material realities, and the upper 3 are said to be more of a spiritual realm. Well, the heart is the lowest of those 3. You might say it's the gateway. And to be able to uplift the life force in the spine up into the higher realms, we have to first pass through this gateway of the heart. And so we begin by instructing ourselves in proper attitudes. Love God, be kind, expand your sympathies for other people, compassion, empathy, all of these sorts of things, which you might say are the softer feminine qualities that have to first be developed before we can begin to raise that energy higher. And so this is where we begin on the spiritual path, is learning to act in this world with the right attitude, to be receptive, which is again a feminine quality. We have that openness to be able to receive, has to be the foundation. And you could say is the essence of immersing ourselves, surrendering ourselves. Again, a feminine quality. Learning to do those first, and then we allow God's grace to come to us. We then allow the divine to come into us. And so Bhakti Yoga, although here it's presented in the latter part of the Gita, is the, you could say, is a requisite quality to have. Now, of course, there's a certain, we must give certain deference to temperament. Each of us are going to proceed on the spiritual path and be open and receptive to spiritual teachings in our own nature. So this is the beauty of Raja Yoga. We must balance all of these, but don't overlook this necessity to aspire to something higher. This, if you could take one aspect of what this means, it's that quality of aspiration of the heart. This is where the spiritual path, you could say, begins, by the devotee wanting to know God, wanting to aspire to something larger than oneself, an understanding larger oneself. If one is merely satisfied with what one has already and does not aspire to something more, one never begins the journey. It's only when we come to that point when we realize, no, this isn't enough. We must have something more. I want something more. What is it? It's that call of the soul that goes out into the spiritual universe that draws to us a response. It draws to us spiritual teachings, draws to us ultimately a teacher, draws to us ultimately the blessings of a guru who takes us by the hand and then introduces us to God. So immerse oneself in the divine and offer everything to God. The successes, the failures, and feel that in every action that we are doing, every action, try to feel that God is working through us and develop in our consciousness, God is the doer, I'm not the doer, but I'm his instrument. Work through me, serve through me, and use me as thy channel, as thy will. Many blessings until next week.